Greetings. Good afternoon. Why is Hegel talking about the Greeks part 2? So, oh, by the way, do you like my hat? This is me Lanzarote Timber Fire hat, okay, from the volcano. I've just come straight down from the volcano. Just bought this. Okay, because Immanuel Kant believed in the autonomy of reason. What does that mean? So, that meant by using our reason, we can freely decide how to act. And we can even act against our natural desires. Okay, so animals don't choose, they act on instinct. So, here's a thought experiment. Imagine, just for a moment, that I'm a heterosexual male, okay? Someone's coming up now. So imagine, oh, just 1 second, because someone's just going to walk past now, and they're going to hear this funny part of my lecture. It's okay, it's all right, come through, yeah. Okay, so, imagine I'm a heterosexual male. And along comes the actress, Diane Lane. Now, she's the actress from, it's called, the one where Richard Gere has the affair. It's called Unfaithful, right? And she's like, goes off with married men in another film as well, the one with Aragorn from, he wasn't Aragorn in that one. He was Aragorn in, I might flash up an image of Diane Lane anyway. But anyway, in all her roles, she's always running off with married fellas, right? So, Diane, she comes up to me, just imagine this, and she says, which is probably not so easy to imagine, isn't it? Because she's going to want to do this. She says, oh, do you know what? You're the most desirable man I've ever met. Hold me close. Closer. Closer. Okay? That's the thought experiment. So, instinct would tell me, now wait a minute, let me put it like this, because the person who's holding the phone, because I haven't got a tripod today, was going to throw the phone at me if I say this. But instinct might tell me, if I wasn't me, that I should cave in and let Diane Lane have her evil way with me. Is that moving that phone? However, irrespective of the fact that that's being held, my camera's being held right now, if I'm obeying Kant's moral law and choosing to do the right thing, then I'm able to overcome my natural desires and tell Diane Lane this. I can say, listen, Diane, sorry, nothing can happen between us because I'm a good Kantian. And there's no way I'm going to let my natural desire, oh yeah, okay, that's not going to get in the way of me and my autonomous moral choice. So, see ya, okay? So that's an illustration of the moral law. So German idealists, oh, by the way, I was thinking about this the other day. I think the only two people, that's like kind of doing right and wrong, isn't it? The only two people who've kind of got radical evil, who've understood it, are, okay, apart from like, you know, maybe the Bible, but there's a fellow called Jean Amery who was a subject to torture, and he's a philosopher in the Second World War. He was subject to torture during the Second World War, and he was like a Belgian philosopher. So he describes the motivations and the actions of torturers in great detail, and it's really horrifying, and it's very illuminating about what evil is. And also, someone I've been reading recently, someone I thought, oh, he's a bit of a religious, you know, maniac, Schelling, who talked about radical evil being sort of like a demonic possession. Now that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But when you see radical evil, I mean, Ukraine's the best example, isn't it, right now, where you've got people like Putin, who, how else can you explain other than he's really enjoying it? Or the Wagner leader Prigozhin, who is just like getting his rocks off. And I think what Schelling was saying about evil was that, I mean, I'm not subscribing to this, but there's definitely some truth in it, is that evil is not, it's not your physical body telling you what to do. It's like your spirit. It's, you know what? Because evil is not like, evil's quite hard to do. I mean, to set up a mercenary group and murder loads of people in Africa and then go to Ukraine and then engage in like suicide, that's hard. Or to be Putin is difficult. And what Schelling's saying is, well, it takes some effort to do that. So radical evil isn't spontaneous. It's actually the other way around. It's not like I need to control these spontaneous urges and that's what good is. Good's spontaneous, I think he's saying that. And what does Kant's also saying to a certain extent, isn't he, about, no, you've got to, your natural urges are bad and you've got to be really good. So anyway, that's just a complete by the by, because we're talking about the Greeks. So the German idealists thought that Kant was missing something by separating reason from nature or desire. Okay. At the same time, the ideas of this art historian pioneer, Johann Winkelmann, who I've talked about previously, they were receiving attention because he resuscitated the ideas of the ancient Greeks being a spontaneous, natural, this is Winkelmann, not Kant. They were a glamorous people, they united reason with natural inclination. And Hegel here, he's responding to the German idealist who turned away from, boring old Kant. This is what Hegel. So the German idealist said, Kant's a bit of a bore, a bit of a like fuddy-duddy. They're like, your mother telling you what to do and what's right and wrong. So they turned to the ancient Greeks. They embraced this idea of a spontaneous people. Okay, so Hegel, in this section, he's assessing Greek ethical life, and he thinks it's not all that it's cracked up to be. So there's a Lutheran pastor, but he's written a really interesting piece about Hegel, David Lloyd, and he says this: Greek ethical life demanded a form of individuality in which subjective will is conditioned by its immediate relationship to ethical substance. So Greek ethical life, what they meant by good conduct and bad conduct. So the Greek view of morality was unique. So they lived in these, it's a unique social formation. They lived in these small city-states where everyone pretty much knew everybody else, even if only vaguely. So the Greek was connected to his society immediately, essentially through facial recognition. So the social structure was so small that the Greek didn't need these mediating institutions. So take the UK. This is what I mean by mediating institutions. There are 60 million people living here. So we can't all go down to the Agora or one of these big theatres, can we? And argue with one another and then decide. Although that's what Twitter sometimes tries to do in a deformed and perverted way. However, that's democracy for trolls, isn't it? But we've got a series of institutions, members of parliament, councillors, pressure groups, political parties, trade unions, trade associations, social services, charities, and so on, pressure groups, and they mediate or intercede. They come between us and power itself. So modern societies are, way more complex than these early states with their direct democracy that looks so appealing. Okay, so the institutions of modern democracies, they work indirectly in this highly complex landscape. So we talk about the Greeks having this immediate relationship to the ethical substance. And what we mean is the Greeks directly participated in the social whole. And the Greek concept of right and wrong were utterly submerged in this oneness with the city-state, that identity of the city-state. So you could only really be right or wrong. You couldn't be right or wrong reflecting through yourself, through your own reason. You can only be doing it through the context of the city-state. And that's what's meant by this ethical substance. So, but freedom, as we understand it, the word in its most basic and, let's face it, its most uncontroversial level that we take for granted, freedom assumes that what an individual means by right and wrong, ethical or unethical, is based upon our individual reason. Okay, not upon the norms of the state. We're not told what to do. So we moderns take it for granted that the individual is separate from the state. And what Hegel called beautiful about the Greeks, their spontaneous and blind attachment to the city-state and the ideals of the city-state, that was undermined by any meaningful concept of individual autonomy. We're going to come to Socrates shortly. So these Greek city-states, with their oracles, their religion, they demanded the loyalty and commitment of the citizens, but when people started to question these values, their loyalties disintegrated. So when people like Socrates started to question the moral authority of the establishment and the gods in the Greek city-states, he was condemned to death. And one of the charges was that he was not worshipping the state religion, because he had a state religion. So we can see in Socrates the impulse of individual reason, because he was always questioning, wasn't he? So we can see that he was one of the founders of what we can see as reason. But this was clashing with the institutions of the beautiful Greek state. So the ethical substance of the state now began to confront the individual as something external. I mean, this is a long process. And again, the allegiance to such an ethical construct was undermined because it was very fragile. You know, once you move beyond the city-state, it sort of became extreme. Well, we'll come to that. So it seems obvious to us now that we aren't free if we act upon externally given codes of moral or religious conduct, and that we're asked to buy into something without reflection, which is what was happening in Greece. So in this society, we've got the brilliance of democracy and public debate. The citizen participated in all aspects of Greek society, which, as I said in the last video, seduces us into thinking, well, many of us are thinking that the Greeks were a fully rounded people, thinkers, warriors, gymnasts, philosophers, artists, which they were. But the polis, the Greek city-state, didn't have, as I said, these mediating institutions, which allows for particularity. In the case of Socrates, we have the most interesting example of a singular, particular man. And what I mean by particularity, it's a famous syllogism, isn't there? All men are mortal. Socrates is man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So Socrates is the exemplar of particularity and reason, even in a syllogism. Okay, so all aspects of the citizen's life in Greece were subsumed under this kind of, it's a North Korean style, I don't know, entity or whatever. So there were no means for a citizen to express their particularity until they were dead, which is something that Hegel talks about. And only at the end of their lives could they be remembered as an individual. So the citizen didn't have, because that's what Hegel said, burial, that's what citizenship was about. That's what individual. You only became an individual when you were dead. That's a phenomenology. So the citizen didn't have any meaningful individual plans that they could pursue outside the polis, and Hegel sees this lack of institutions as a source of this conflict and a source of its ends. So Hegel likes mediations. He likes complex institutional arrangements. As I said in a previous video, for example, he had in mind Württemberg in Germany, where he grew up, and this seems to have helped him understand what absolutism and not dictatorship, but absolutism, lack of freedom, is about. So whether it's a medieval absolutism of a German prince or the democratic absolutism of Greek democracy, and Württemberg had lots of these mediating institutions that had been built up over perhaps centuries. In other words, German cities had a middle class and the Greek ones didn't. So David Lloyd says this: a citizen's project would simply run parallel to public life with no connection to it. Particularity ruins the Greeks. Ruined the Greeks' socially and politically cohesive form of life because of the absence of mediating institutions. So as Hegel says, many citizens now separated themselves from practical life from the affairs of the state. So the French Marxist and Hegel philosopher Veyard Baron puts it like this neatly. So the Greeks lived publicly, they had not yet invented the private life. So without these mediating institutions, there's the danger, the reality of extreme conformity to the ideals of the state, Athens, Sparta, North Korea, alongside individuals being completely alienated from the state. So the citizen doesn't have the benefits of an institutional framework other than the state, and so they withdraw into the privacy of their own heads. And if you look at the dissidents in Eastern Europe, for example, Václav Havel and stuff like that under communism, you can see that loads of them just disappeared into this weird private life, understandably, because you couldn't participate in the state, because the state was everything. Rousseau thought that the more influence a citizen had in drafting the laws of the state, the better the state would be run. You can't argue with it, can you? And consequently, the larger the state becomes, the less liberty there is. Well, you can argue with that one, but sorry, a bit windy today. So Rousseau thinks that when a state reaches a certain size, the people will have less influence and will basically give up on the state. So he was a great believer in participatory politics, and he sees the conflict between the public and the private a bit like Hegel did, but with qualifications. Rousseau, though, thought that the pursuit of private business interests was problematic. In fact, he didn't like it at all. He thought the institution of private property wasn't a natural state of affairs. He wanted to see public participation rather than people pursuing their own private business interests. And Hegel, on the other hand, thought that a restraint on the pursuit of private interests was a limitation on freedom. Hegel saw that the state needed these mediating institutions to make it work. So that's not in the phenomenology, by the way, but it's worth mentioning here. So Greek democracy presupposed a heavy burden on public participation, whether that participation declined, when it declined, it caused a crisis. So Lloyd writes about the democratic life of the polis. Public activities affected the social and political integration of citizens with one another and with the polis, which gave the Greek democracy its lively character, affecting the beautiful ethical individuality that made Greek democracy possible. Anyone who didn't have the time and resources to participate in these activities was simply cut off from the public life of the polis. So the significant, if not enormous, level of commitment and participation required, that you needed a lot of leisure to do this, basically. And because slaves did all the work in Athens, along with the women, this freed a class of male citizens for public participation. So forget the romance about ancient Greeks. It's just big guys who work out, doing loads of stuff, with loads of like slaves and women doing all the hard work. Okay, good way to put it. So, and remember the phrase I used in a previous video, which was some people worked while others watched. That's ancient Greece. So Hegel said in Philosophy of Right, describing the Greek realm, it's very short, Google it, it's interesting. The result is that the whole is divided into a group of particular national minds. Ultimate decision is ascribed not to the subjectivity of explicitly independent self-consciousness, but to a power standing above and outside it. On the other hand, the due satisfaction of particular needs is not yet comprised in the sphere of freedom, but is relegated exclusively to a class of slaves. Slaves do all the work. There you go. So slavery, therefore, it's an invisible and unacknowledged aspect of Greek ethical life. So if you see Rick Roderick video about the Greeks, it's brilliant, they're entertaining, I agree with him, but he doesn't acknowledge that part of it. So Hegel also said that slavery was a necessary condition of a beautiful democracy. So he's slagging off the Greeks, isn't he? So, and of course he was a Christian, Hegel. And that doesn't necessarily mean he believed in God, even though he was a Christian. But Hegel saw Christianity as being a progressive step in history. That's what I argue, and I think it's true. And I'd say more than progressive. Although it's open to question whether he believed in God, it seems clear to me that not only he was a Christian, and I don't want to go down that path, by the way, I have an argument about that. And I'm not even sure whether it followed the Lutheran pastor Loy all the way, because he says, the ending of slavery in Europe, in Christian Europe, is to be sought in nothing but the principle of Christianity itself. The Christian religion is the religion of absolute freedom, and only for Christians does man count as such man in his infinity and universality. Now, I'm going to come to that. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I'm saying that's what Loy says, and he's got an interesting take on Hegel. Okay, but my understanding is that Hegel thought that the Christian religion laid the foundation for a conception of the human being in which individuality is recognized. Unlike the Greek society, universality, a universal individual. So the Greek concept of the individual was deeply flawed. They simply didn't recognize some people as persons, which is like most of the population, in fact, slaves and women. They saw them instead as slaves, yet you suited for slavery. And they also saw access to citizenship on the basis of gender. And so they failed to recognize some people as persons, women and slaves. So that was inbuilt into their ethical model. So when Hegel's mediating institutions don't exist, then our recognition of each other has a completely different basis, such as sex or ability. So direct democracies require citizens to share a deep obligation to their state and its norms, and this is only possible in a small state with agreed participation in public festivals, and that educates citizens into what it means to be a citizen. Okay, so participation meant citizenship, and citizenship meant participation. That's my quote. So, and I want to give just a little bit extra about the section reason as lawgiver. I know I'm jumping around a lot from Greece, but this is an important section about moral absolutes. It's important. So lots of people on the left look for certainty. You know, whether it's Mao's Little Red Book or I've got a copy of the Communist Manifesto and I get it now. I just get it. So Hegel's book, on the other, if you're going to take anything from it, it's the opposite. He says there is no certainty. But much of the left wants to find a formula, maybe contained in something that Marx or Lenin said, or someone expert said, or a slogan, even, or a political program. They want to find it as something that is right for all time. Something you can just, it's hard, this one, but I have the slogan, then I can get it. So they need the crutch of a rule or a set of rules that can tell us how to behave at all times, okay? So all you've got to do is wheel out this moral formula and bingo, okay? Your work is done. So in relation to the war in Ukraine, it's been painful. So lots of tankies and friends and associates of tankies reproduce wonderful formulas, which we've all heard, such as war is wrong, or, smash imperialism, down with the bourgeoisie, which are nearly all Sparts. By the way, sorry I'm doing the American Spart accent there, because when I was young, all the Sparts came from Canada or in America. They come to Liverpool when I was at uni. Smash the bourgeois. Pleased to meet you. Smash the bourgeoisie. So that was their Kantian sort of moral absolute they had. Okay. So they've been doing this since 1914. In fact, they've been doing this since before that. They've been doing this since before Marx's time. But the tanky left churns out moral absolutes like a factory. And Hegel examines the emptiness of moral absolutes in paragraph 424. So he talks about the truth. Everyone ought to speak the truth. In this duty is expressed unconditionally, the condition will at once be admitted. If he knows the truth, the commandment then will now run, everyone ought to speak the truth at all times, according to his knowledge and conviction. Sound reason, this ethical substance precisely, which knows immediately what is right and good, will also explain that this condition was already so much part and parcel of the universe, that universal maxim, that this is how it meant that commandment to be understood. So, not everyone knows the truth at all the time, so it must be done according to the best of your knowledge. Okay? But notice something here. The rule is no longer universal and necessary. Because you've said, well, only if you know the truth. So that's what Hegel's doing. He's undermining this. Oh, listen, I've just got all the answers, guys. I'm Kim Il-sung. I am Xi Jinping. I am Lenin. I just know it, guys. So you just can't have that. It's impossible to work with moral absolutes, or you're a loony, really. So moral universals don't work. And I'll give you a really good example. So you're in, let's tell the truth one. You're in Nazi Germany. Okay, imagine I'm in, they knock on my door. Hello, it's the Germans. I'm Frank is in the attic, okay? And I'm in, not Nazi Germany, it's Holland, isn't it? And I'm Frank's in the attic and I'm protecting him. But I've got to tell the truth at all time, because that's the model absolute. Smash the bourgeoisie. I'm always, what's the other one? Always tell the truth. Imperialism, down with war. I believe in peace. I am a pacifist. I can't do wrong. So I have to follow this moral absolute. Okay. And Frank's in the cellar. Nazis knock on the door. Tell the truth. You always must tell the truth. She's upstairs. I mean, who's going to do that? You're going to lie your arse off, aren't you, if Anne Frank's upstairs? Because, so this idea of a moral absolute, it's completely hollow. It's sad, it's hypocritical, it's hollow, and that's what Hegel's getting at. Okay. So, but by the way, some people feel really good. You know something? I tell you upstairs because I've got to obey my own conscience. And that's another really weird, sick part of reason, isn't it? Well, no, I'll reason because I tell the truth and I'm following the moral law and I've got to tell the truth at all times. Okay, so exactly, I keep on going on about Ukraine, but in Ukraine we hear the same stuff. War is wrong, imperialism wrong, and so on. But the minute you see Russian tanks rumbling down your street, just think about it. How many of you will be thinking about the moral law and so on? And it all comes crumbling down. And also there's a really interesting one of workers' unity. Right, workers' unity at all times. Okay, so, and that's a classic Marxist slogan, and it is important. And I believe in it as well, by the way, but it can't be taken as a moral absolute in the same way as any statement. So I'll give you an example. What do we mean by this absolute workers' unity? And after the Russian invasion, this absolute has left. They managed to get the statement passed through the executive, I'm going to be very particular here, of the Fire Brigade Union in the UK. So point 5 of their Ukraine statement is this, right? It's funny, and it's tragic, and it's weird. So I want to tell you this. It says, we support, this is the Fire Brigade Union in the UK, they're actually giving support to Ukraine. These loonies got this through. It said, we support workers in Ukraine acting independently of the Zelensky regime. Okay, I'll go with that. And building their own organisations, yeah, and taking independent action. Nothing wrong with that. This should include attempts to build dialogue and links with rank and file troops in the invading Russian forces. So that's where workers' unity goes completely out the window. So, I mean, I invited. I mean, that's like, so you're in the Wagner group, okay? So I'm defending my position somewhere, and the Wagner group are just 200 meters away, very close actually. So I actually invited on Facebook and stuff like that people who voted this through to go to Ukraine, to go down on the front line. Not difficult to do. Get your leaflets printed in England and take them over. Yeah, do it in Russian, and then shout out, "Hey boys!" to the Wagner group. Workers, we're the same. Have you seen that Paul McCartney video? The one that he's, where he crossed the pit, yeah. And have you seen the Peter Hooton one as well? The farm where it's all together. It's just, you know what? It's good in some respects, but it's not a moral universal. And when people keep on churning them out about, let's keep on doing, and just go and see the way, it's bullshit. And it's harmful bullshit as well. So, this type of moral absolutism on the left, it won't work. Workers' unity is only possible, this is in my opinion, if there's a defeat or near defeat of the Russian state when it's teetering. And then workers on the other side say, do you know what? I don't believe in my state. But it's not possible all the time when someone's got a gun to your head. You can't, hey, do you fancy having workers' unity? You've got to do it under many circumstances. You can do it. You can do it in Britain. You can do it in Western Europe. You try doing that anywhere else where there's a war. It's not possible. So, otherwise, this appeal, it's a suicide note, isn't it, essentially? It's the same with this thing about opposing imperialism, this absolutism. That means opposing arms going to Ukraine, that's a line that there's loads of these Marxists, by the way, and they don't want to cross this line, except that, by the way, if that's a universal appeal, what did every single Marxist do when America sent tanks over to the USSR in World War One? By the way, America sent 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Oh my God, this is... I read this somewhere in Counterfire, and they went, this is a proxy war. Well, 31 tanks. How many did they send over to the USSR? 7,000. So a lot of these arguments you see using moral absolutes. The moral absolutes now, they weren't moral absolutes in 1945. So they're not absolutes. So the entire basis of their arguments, it's just flannel and why are they? It puzzles me. Why are they doing it? I mean, I think they are trapped in a time warp. That's one thing. But they presuppose this. What they're failing to do is look at Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, China. They can't say that you can't use the same sorts of arguments that we can use. We're lucky enough to use in Western Europe and America. We're damn lucky. You can't even use Facebook and YouTube in Russia and China. You can't. Well, you can't. You might be able to do it in Russia if you're lucky. You can't do it in China. But these moral absolutes, they're just invisible. They are Western privileged leftists, and hopefully they'll die out soon. But they're a resistant lot because they're like trapped, and lots of them are in positions of power and stuff like that because they've been hanging around the unions for years and stuff, and they get the mates jobs and stuff like that in the unions of various political parties. But they're small; they don't really represent anyone. Anyway, I'm rambling on here. That's moral absolutes. That's Kant. That's the Greeks, and this is Lanzarote. See you later. This is my hat.